All right, good morning. Just me and Doug right now, but we are waiting for Michael Yan to join us, who will be here any second. So just stand by. Michael Yan giving his latest update from Panama, talk about the invasion. I assume we're going to hear a bit about how Trump is failing to stop the UN and basically that if you're a total MAGA believer, that you should wake up. These are some of the major themes I think we're going to hear from Michael, but we'll see in just a second as he joins us. It's coming
I
right
think
now.
I think Michael's overemphasizing China as a danger, frankly. And we'll
We should
have to.
ask him that. We should ask him that. Why do you think, like, we see these problems in the world? Clearly, our own government, we can see that they're doing evil. There's a lot of evidence of that. Like, what evidence do we have, or what evidence is there that China's really this great rival that's trying to destroy us?
And at the same time, there's some evidence that although they're making great advances technologically, nothing wrong with that. Uh, well, at least Michael would probably think that there is.
Yeah, there is evidence that they're having economic problems, no doubt. Real estate hangover hasn't gone away, if nothing else.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, they've built roads and high-speed rail to cities that nobody lives in, stuff like that. It's a huge waste of capital. And of course, what's happening on the tariff front is going to be discombobulating for them.
Tariff,
So,
tariff front, yes. Yeah, no doubt about it. I mean, especially because the U.S. is going after related parties. It's not, they can't just circumvent, direct exports from, they can't circumvent the direct exports from China by routing things through or providing components for Korea, for instance, or Vietnam or something like that. So they block those passages, really gets in the way.
it's almost as if Trump is trying to purposefully make enemies out of people that, well, maybe you think they were enemies, but I don't think they were enemies per se. But look at what's happening with the Canadians. I mean, a lot of people feel the way the Canadians feel now. Those damned Americans. They're
I
ruining our.
mean, they got a total dirtbag as a prime minister because of Trump's stance, I think, if nothing else. I mean, I think that was a huge contributor. Their whole like elbows up kind of whatever that means to Canadians. I don't know, but it's a big thing for them.
I'm not sure if there's a Canadian song that starts out, I'm a lumberjack and I'm okay. You ever heard that?
Vaguely from like when I was a kid, maybe. Yeah.
Well, anyway, there probably aren't going to be very many Canadian lumberjacks anymore in the future either, along with Canadian Mounties with Wonder Dogs on their dog sleds.
I don't think the Mounties are like that anymore. The Mounties I saw during the Canadian trucker protest did not look like those guys.
No, no, I don't think so. And they don't think like them for.
What's on your mind these days? What's the biggest thing preoccupying Michael Yon?
Well, I'm in Panama still. So, I mean, this is obviously very important. Panama is, one of the seven main naval choke points in the world. And this is the most important for the United States. And so, in addition to that, there's the Darien Gap. I've got a couple people down there today. As of last evening, the camps are open, but there's very few migrante in them. There's very few. It's mostly been choked down. It's interesting over the years, the last 4 or so years, I've said so many times, including with you, that it's easy to close the Darien Gap. I mean, if I were sitting at a table of generals and one said that we couldn't close it, I would say, and you are dismissed, because an energetic captain with, an average captain could close the Darien Gap, because, you've got the Darien Gap on your side. The Darien Gap, for those who don't know, is that gap of jungle that's about 100 kilometers. And there's no road for the Darien Gap. That's why they call it the Gap. But actually, in Spanish, they call it Tampon del Darien, the tampon of Darien, the plug of Darien. And they call it that because it's a defense plug, right? The jungle is like our government and the Panamanian government have wanted to keep that gap closed for generations because that is a huge defense against invasion from Colombia route, right? And
Right. I
so,
mean, without that, it would have been really hard to for Panama to gain its independence, right? Because they sent. I'm reading this book that you recommended. You and Matt Bracken recommended this book,
I've
Path
got it
Between
right
the
here.
Seas. It's amazing. It is so well written. I'm like 2/3 of the way through it, and I love it. And it's like, they had U.S. gunboats on either side of the canal to keep the Colombians from taking over, and the
Oh
Colombians
yeah,
apparently sent 1,000 troops trying to do the overland route to try and take it back. They all
yeah,
gave up and turned back. The gap stopped them, you know. So
yeah.
it's amazing.
I'm going to hook in a different monitor here. The way that I found the road being built through the Darien Gap back, to Colombia, is I mean, you see all these books. I bought them in antique bookstores around here, and like 3 times that many. I've been going through the old maps and that sort of thing, and as I always do, always go to the maps, right? And I'm like, if they're going to build a road to the Darien, they're going to do it in this one place. So I always looked every time I go down there for 3 years, and then finally I found it. Boom, and they're building the road right along the way the old maps would describe that you would build a road between Panama and Colombia because our ancestors knew what they were doing. And so I drove up to Panama City that day, and I was talking to people in the Panamanian government saying, who's building the bridge to Colombia, who's paying for it. And I've said this to you before, but they denied it. They're like, we're not building any road. We're not building bridges in the Darien towards Colombia. And I'm like, yeah, you 100% are. I was just there. You're building 2 bridges. And they're like, no, we're not. Actually, I don't think they were lying. I think they actually didn't know. And
Really?
so I said, see the mud on my boots. I mean, I was literally just at the abutment of the bridge by Yavitsa. And so you are 100%, and these are not small bridges, right? These are, one guy said, the foreman out there, a Soontrax guy, he said, no, these are for Yucca. And I'm like, maybe Yucca with guns on the front of them. I don't know. They're not Yucca. I mean, I took Brett Weinstein and others down there, and yeah, it's clearly not for Yucca. But in any case, all of these things that we keep seeing globally are about routes, resources, that sort of thing. These are global power plays. As you know, Panama is not just a little world in and of itself. This is one of the same 7 major naval chokeholds. And anybody who's read Alfred Mann, he came out with this book, Sea Power, the effects of sea power on history, from 1660 to maybe 1778. I don't recall. But anyway, it's his book is unbelievable. It's like the Sun Tzu and Clausewitz put together, but of naval power. And all the naval officers watching this, you're like, of course, Alfred Mann. But the Army guys, a lot of them don't know it at all. And Alfred Mann is absolutely seminal work, and it's absolutely. He was here. He was in Panama. His book came out in 1890. Which was about 24 years before the canal opened, right? So Americans were not even working on the canal
Oh,
yet.
it's the
We were
French
doing
doing it then.
reconnaissance.
The
I'm
French were
sorry,
there,
go ahead.
weren't they? The French were there then, weren't they?
They were. They were. The French, as you know from the book that you're reading, the incredible book that you're reading. Does your book, I don't remember, does that book, it's a great book, does it mention Alfred Mann? It probably does.
I
Um,
don't I don't recall his name, actually.
a lot of the topics that are in your book come from these books behind me, actually, and maps. I've got these incredible. These books are all from the 17 and 1800s and early 1900s, and like these are. I mean, these are literally like maps and stuff from the old canal. They fold out like 6 feet. It's unbelievable.
Oh no,
You know,
he's mentioned in here. Actually, I see at least 3 references to him in the book.
yeah, Mahan is. I mean, seriously, he's the Sun Tzu plus Clausewitz when it comes to naval stuff. And when you ask senior naval people about Mahan, because I was just talking with a retired naval intelligence guy last night and this morning, actually, about the best books to understand, the vascular system of of global trade. And he's like, man, everything else follows, right? And he sent me photos of his bookshelf actually. And it's interesting because I found some books in Tokyo, antique Tokyo bookstore on Mahan about the War of 1812. It was like 4 or 5 books, and I bought them and sent them to him actually in Switzerland. And because the Mahan was he was so wise. Actually, he talks about a lot of the things that you and Doug talk about. Like I watch many hours of your programs. A lot of the stuff that you talk about, you probably don't realize Mahan was talking about these. And well, his book came out in 1890. For instance, he talks about why did Spain go broke, right? And Portugal. And Alfred Mann talks about in his 1890 book, they were here, of course. I mean, Spain was thick here. I mean, I'm sitting on the spot of pirate fights right here, right? And so Spain and Portugal were out there getting lots and lots of gold and silver, and they would ship that back to Spain and Portugal, like according to Mahan, like $500 million worth of the Portuguese gold came out of Brazilian mines, right? That's 500. He wrote that book in 1890, and so I don't know how much.
Michael,
that
I
would
got to
be
stop. I know we're going to forget, but I got to stop. Everybody says when they talk about dollars, it's that we really should be talking about ounces of gold
You're
because the
right.
dollar was redeemable for a specific amount of gold, and $500 million doesn't really mean much because the
No,
dollar.
you're right. You're right. And every time I say dollars, I think Doug would say, you're in my head. And so, but that's what Alfred Mann said. I mean, he put it in dollars. I should have wrote a note, to Alfred Mahan and show it to him in heaven. But you should have done this. Oh, Doug, I got this one book here. It's the 1867 book on the railway here, and they price people coming through the canal, or not the canal, but 1867 railway in gold, right? So it talked 1 ounce of gold in 1867.
Yeah, $20 gold piece for the ride.
Oh, that's right. I sent a copy of that to you, right? And it was 5 ounces for a horse, 5 ounces, right? So
That's big money.
Well,
yeah,
they were trying to get to the gold rush in San Francisco.
yeah. And that's why Grant's guys were here and, trying to, anyway, President Grant, let me tell you what I was saying about Mahan in Portugal, because this is the stuff you guys talk about, but he's talking about it in 1890. He's like, Spain was out here. Basically, the Spanish and Portuguese would show up, look for the natives. What kind of gold and silver are they wearing? If you're wearing gold and silver, more Spanish are going to come because those are the scout ants, right? And, inevitably, a lot of them live on rivers. I mean, the natives. And so they can sail up the rivers. That's why in Panama and all over the world, you'll see a lot of the forts are at the mouths of rivers or where rivers fork further inland. Like here in Panama, a lot of the old Spanish forts are at the mouths of the rivers, right? And they're still there, right? And so, I mean, remnants of them. But so the Spaniards would come in and they would steal the gold and steal the silver and, ask, demand where's the gold and silver. And if you didn't tell them, they'd put the dogs on you or burn you alive, that sort of stuff. But, but then they would take that gold and silver back to Portugal and Spain, and then they would just use it to buy like ships from the Dutch or, other people like the English. So they ended up with the Spanish and the Portuguese had a lot of gold and silver, but they didn't have that wealth in the industry, right? So this was very costly to them later. Like they didn't have strong navies like the Dutch and especially the English ended up developing. And they, the bottom line is the Dutch, I mean, the Dutch, when they made colonies, and especially the English, they did it in different ways. Mann talks about this extensively. Like the English would go and like make tea farms and that sort of thing, tea plantations and, India or whatever. But the Spanish and the Portuguese, they were just basically bank robbers. They would just come, steal the gold and silver, spend the gold and silver, and then end up poor, right, as a country. It's very interesting. And a lot of that played out right here in Panama, especially for the Spanish. And, down in Darien is where the Spanish assembled their army to attack the Incas. So this is just amazing, all the things that have happened here.
What's the most interesting thing you've seen besides the windmills on the Chinese ship? What's the most interesting thing you've seen in the last several days?
Well, I took Laura Logan down into the jungle, took her to the Darien Gap, and took her through the canal, showed her all kinds of things, got them up in a helicopter. And, Laura, she's extremely experienced, super smart. And even Laura wasn't really tracking how important the Panama Canal was. So that was a very successful trip because now she's getting ready to come back down. And, when you get serious people like that here, they realize I got to start paying attention to this thing. So that was good. One of the things that I spent some time on last week was I set up on a hill and I just watched as it's a hill near Gamboa. And for those who are familiar with Panama, they know about Gamboa, or at least this area of Panama. It's right beside the canal. And there's actually a Nazi crane there, believe it or not, World War II crane that somehow ended up on the Panama Canal. You can look it up. There's a lot of articles about it, but there's a train track right there as well. In 2020, that a ship lost its rudder or whatever and ran into that bridge. Now that bridge is important because if you understand how that's the Panama Canal Railway, that's a bridge that is vital to making that railway work. And that railway is still strategic today, and I'll explain why. But anyway, in 2020, a ship hit it and took it out for months. So there was no traffic going back and forth on that train. Why is that train even important? And why would I spend a day up on a hill just watching traffic go through to try to figure out what happened? I've talked with two of the investigators actually who were on scene very quickly. One of them says he thinks it was just an honest, the ship just went out of control and hit the bridge. And the other thinks it's quite suspicious because mathematically it was, kind of off. But anyway, it hit it. So, because there's this one little tiny stretch of bridge and you hit it right in the perfect spot, Anyway, it could be coincidence. But why is that?
Like the Baltimore Bridge, right?
Yes, and like the Ever Given and the Suez and so many other things. So that's why I just sat up there and made time lapses and watching the ships go by and that sort of thing. But in any case, I mean, it is possible it was just an accident, an honest accident, because anything that's mathematically possible will actually happen, according to theory. And that wasn't just possible. I mean, yeah, doing math in my head, I would say it'd be like 1 out of an 800 chance because the canal is about 50 miles long. And so you got two sides to the canal. So let's say that's 100 miles long. And then there's the middle. The ship could have just kept going and hit somewhere in the middle because there's some other things that could hit. But
So the
but I would
train
say it's
service is
about
still down. It's still down now, though. The
no,
train.
no, it works now. It works. But I would say the chances are maybe 1 out of 800 or 1 out of 900 that it would have hit that little spot. So I mean, it's actually kind of a high chance when you think about it. When there are other ships who have lost steering in the past, that's what I'm getting to there. So in any case, but I'm still curious about that. Now, why is that railway even important when the canal is now open? Keep in mind, the railway opened in 1855, right? Long before the canal opened. Then the French came, tried to make a canal. They failed and went bankrupt. And I've got some of their old books here in French and their old maps. They wanted to make a sea level canal and yada, yada.
That railway was the most expensive railway per mile ever built, and it was also the most profitable.
Look, an ounce of gold per person. And they even had the price for beehives in there. It's in one of my books. Yeah, that railway. So the French bought that railway to make the canal, actually. So in any case, now I'm going somewhere with this. Purchase of railway is important as of this last month. The railway, the two ports on there's more than two ports. There's 7 ports, but there's 2 ports that are really important. They are Boardwalk and Park Place on the canal. Those are on the Atlantic and Pacific sides, right? And so those are the Hutchison ports that China has, right? That's important to keep in mind. Those are the Boardwalk and Park Place. Of all the ports here, you would want not just one of those, you would want both. You need both, right? Why do you need both? Because that railway connects both of those ports. Now, why is that important? It doesn't connect the ports, the other ports, or the ports on the other side of the canal, because there's 2 sides to the canal and there's ports on the other side. It doesn't connect those. So ships can come on the Pacific side or the Atlantic side and park at these docks, Hutchison docks, unload, takes 90 seconds per container approximately, and they can unload the ship, put it on the train, and ship it to the other side, and vice versa is going on. And those ships don't need to go through the canal, right? So in other words, Panama is just a stop on the Pacific route, and it drop off containers, pick up containers, and continue. And they do the same on the Atlantic. So there's a huge amount of ships that don't even need to go through the canal because they can just stop and drop off their packages and pick up packages, basically a drop box. And so that railway connects those two ports, which I've never seen in the news at all. Now, why is this even important? Trump trying to push BlackRock, his buddies at BlackRock, to buy those two ports, the Hutchison ports on the Atlantic and Pacific sides. Now, MSC, BlackRock has a relationship with MSC, the Mediterranean Shipping Company. The two big boys in the canal for shipping are MSC and Maersk. Maersk, remember Maersk. Maersk, the Danish company, right? So MSC has a relationship with BlackRock. If BlackRock were to get those two ports, which China is effectively blocking at this point, then they would be connected by BlackRock's buddy, who I'm sure are deeply entwined with the railway. They would have they would have the vital terrain of the canal, right? And the vital terrain of the operations of the actual freight moving through the canal would be those two ports and the railway. So Maersk came in suddenly and bought that railway just like a few weeks ago, maybe a month ago now. The Danish company bought that railway. So I'm just curious. That's why I was sitting up on that hill at
What did they pay
Gambella.
for it, Michael? Do you know what they paid by any chance?
I don't. And I don't know if that's public or not. It may be public, but I don't know. But that's why I sat on that hill, because I thought, people have wanted that railway. That's a strategic railway because that will be part of the Belt and Road Initiative and all these other sorts of things. And so I sat on that hill and I thought maybe somebody took the bridge out to weaken the current owner at the time, so that, in a predatory move, right? If you take out the railway and they're out of business for a few months, maybe you weaken them and drop the price. I don't know. I have no idea. Again, I talked with two experts. Both are extremely familiar with canal operations, and they had diametrically opposed views. One was like, it's an honest accident, and the other's like, no, it looks suspicious. I have no idea. But, just because it would make sense to take it out if you would want to buy it. I don't know. I have no idea. But that railway is still vital today. And by the way, Masako and I, we got on that train, and they actually let her get on top of the train and put a camera on top of the train and let us ride. What's that?
She can get away with anything.
She's got Japanese privilege. It's like a joke between us. I mean, it's unbelievable. They let her open one of the locks at Agua Clara. So I got video of it. We were up in, you're not supposed to even be there. It's like, anyway, so we got in there and, they let her open the locks. They're showing her, click this button, it's just a mouse click, and the Agua Clara's locks. The huge canal actually. And so, because there's two canals, there's the super canal, for the giant ships, and then there's the old 1914 canal, which is still operational. So since the time we opened it in 1914, they've had to widen it. And when the canal was widened, or when they added other lanes, actually, they still share a lot of the canal, the original canal, but then they go through separate lanes for smaller and larger ships. But once that was opened, the larger canal was opened, then that helped build the global, production of larger ships, because these large ships can now, by the way, canals important. So I started studying canals, like the history of canals. And I didn't realize, but the United States built roughly 4,000 miles of canals in the 1800s, like 4,000 miles. And then when they started building a lot more railways in the United States, then that reduced the production of, the creation of canals considerably, because the railways can do some things that the canals can't do, and they're cheaper to build. And it's cheaper to send by water, but in some cases it's cheaper to send by rail. And also there's many, the old history of canals is amazing. So in the 1800s, when you looked at the French making their go at making the canal here, they were high on their success at Suez, which you're reading in that book, the incredible book, The Path Between the Seas. They were very successful at the Suez Canal, which is a sea level canal, which was very difficult, but it's nothing compared to the Panama Canal. And so, but that was during the 1800s, during the era when everybody, you know, there's these eras where we got to build the best bridge, or we got to build the highest skyscraper, or the biggest rocket, or biggest airplane.
That whole
This
idea,
was canal time.
that whole era is so astounding in what
It
people
is.
believed was possible. And the figures that come through in that book, and you know the attitude they had about the future, that they could just that they could build it. And the is it Les Passes, I think, the French guy,
De Lesseps.
De Lesseps, so the French guy too, who did the Suez, like he wasn't an engineer, but he's just a guy who believed anything was possible. He's a great
Oh.
salesman, super charismatic, and wouldn't give up. And he also recognized that he was in a period, he was living during the second industrial revolution, where literally the technology, he would see things that could not be done today, but he knew that things were being invented so quickly that there would emerge a solution to the problem. And he was right. And I, you know, I really think with robotics and AI, like we're entering a stage like that as well, where solutions to problems will emerge. So problems that seem intractable to us today.
I know you and Doug would love this. This is one of the old French bonds for the
Hmm.
canals. This is literally an original.
That's great.
Yeah,
Is
sorry,
that,
the lights.
is that,
But,
is that one?
but you know wouldn't that have been redeemed because didn't the American government actually did the right thing, and instead of stealing all this shit, they paid the French
They
uh,
did, but Doug, what it
for
was is
what they've done.
they had
Yeah.
they had an original canal company though that went bankrupt, and then they formed, and I think most people got wiped out in that, and they formed a new corporation, of which Eiffel, the guy who made the Eiffel Tower, was a big shareholder in, and a few others. It seems like some insiders got in on this in this new, like, caretaker corporation for it. And so, but I do believe the bondholders did get paid out at 10 cents on the dollar ultimately.
Yeah. Well, there was numerous bond issues. So it was a really
Yeah, a
dramatic
lot.
period. Some of it's described in that book. I mean, and then De Lesseps, he almost went to prison, but he was much
Too old,
too old.
and too
That's
much of a
right.
hero.
That's right. Yeah. And so they had both things. You know what's
But they put
interesting?
his son in prison.
That's right. Oh yeah. You see how good that book is. It's unbelievable. And oh man, and one of the things that really killed the French was those mosquitoes. Now keep in mind, back then we didn't know mosquitoes were the spread, not the cause, but they were a vector for yellow fever, which is now making a show again, apparently anyway, let's see, in the Darien, and malaria and dengue and all these other things, right? So this is quite interesting. This is fascinating because the mosquito aspect of it, which I'm sure it's definitely in your book, you know, in 1881 there was the Cuban scientist Carlos, oh good Lord, Finlay, and so he was over in Cuba. And you know, he's like, it's the mosquitoes, and people are like, oh, you're kooky, right? There was people in the past that said it was mosquitoes too, and everybody always thought you're just out of your mind. How could a little mosquito kill more people than, you know, well,
They
anything?
thought it was
You know?
bad. They thought it was bad. You know, it was stuff in the earth. And when the earth got stirred up, it caused these things, is what they thought.
Miasma. They called it miasma, right? And so miasma, that's why the doctors would wear those old, you know, the toucan bill, you know, and they had incense in there, right? So that's where the word malaria came from, malaria, right? Bad air, malaria. So you know, the stinky air was not causal, but it was certainly associated. And so what do all the epidemiologists always say? You know, it's a correlation is not causation, right? So, but for centuries, people thought it was malaria, bad air. I found a newspaper article last week when I was looking up something about this actually, and it's from 1874 in the United States, and they're talking about the little mosquito wrigglers. Keep in mind, microscopes were still pretty primitive at that time. They were getting better in the 1870s, though, but Well, a mosquito wriggler was huge by that time for microscopes, but they realized the wrigglers were, you know, the baby mosquitoes. But in this newspaper article from 1874, they thought that the wrigglers were keeping down the malarious air. They thought that the mosquitoes were eating stuff that made the air stink. Boy, were they in for a surprise. They thought the mosquito larvae were keeping the malarial air down. But that was 1874. 1881, Carlos Finlay in Cuba is like, it's those mosquitoes. It's, you know, Aedes aegypti, Culex, Anopheles, all those guys. I don't remember specifically which ones he was fingering, but then the U.S. Army, you know, there's a mass grave for yellow fever victims here not far away for French, right? I mean, so that was largely what knocked them in the head was the malarial, and plus they had a bad plan for the canal. But in any case, so then the U.S. Army says, hey, it's mosquitoes. That Cuban guy was right. And so before we even, you'll see this in your book, before we even got serious about the canal, it was like, how are we going to fight Anopheles, Culex, and Aedes mosquitoes, right? So Gorgas, whose institute, again, is down the road. Everything's down the road here, one-stop shopping. You know, he was very serious about the mosquitoes. I have a book where
he was the only guy who stayed the whole time for the building of the canal.
he was a stud. I mean, and he's the Gorgas Institute's down the road. Bill Gates was involved with them recently, suspiciously. And, you know, because Bill Gates is doing mosquitoes down in Colombia, and there's just been yellow fever outbreak reported in Colombia, killing people. I've been warning about yellow fever straight for, I don't know, 4 or 5 years, right? Because anyway, not to go into that. But the bottom line is the yellow fever. The U.S. Army, Gorgas and all this, they assembled mosquito brigades. And I've got a book where they detail like how you shall assemble your mosquito brigades, how you will fight these mosquitoes because we're going to clonk them in the head. And they did. So once we knew that it was mosquitoes that were a vector, they weren't really causal, but they're a vector, then that made the safety just go through the roof here. We weren't taking as many casualties. In fact, when Trump talked about 38,000 Americans were killed building the canal, one of my books here, it's the 1913 book. It's a report to, it's a Isthmian Canal report to, you know, back to the government in Washington about everything going on here, you know, progress and the Gatun Dam and all these different things. And there's one section on medical. And so this is 1913, just months before the canal opened. And total deaths were about 30, it was 3,000 and something, 3,800, 3,500 or something like that. And so what Trump said was 38,000 Americans. You actually have to chop off about 2 zeros because there was only about 300 and something actual Americans. Most of the people who died were West Indians and that sort of thing. So, I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, these old books, they're the actual reports and the actual silver rolls and the gold rolls, which you read about in that book. I mean, it's got an actual, you know, how many men are on the silver rolls and all these things. It's fascinating.
Well, you mentioned Trump, so I got to ask you, what are your thoughts about what the Trump administration is doing?
Nothing's changed. I mean, have I ever said one good word about what Trump's up to? I don't believe he's on our team or Abbott in Texas. I've said this since the beginning with Abbott. I've warned about Abbott 1,000 times. I've warned about Trump 10,000 times, right? Now, the Darien Gap is closed, effectively closed. There's a little bit of trickle coming through, but the camps are wide open. I was just at the IOM office here 2 days ago in Panama, in Ciudad del Saber, City of Knowledge. They're open. They were sitting at their desks. They're actually opening a second office in the Ciudad del Saber. We have not defunded the United Nations. And I said this before the inauguration, over and over and over, in writing and in interviews. If you don't close down the United Nations, all else that follows does not matter. You can close the border. You have to do mass deportations. And I mean a lot, you know, and, you know, Eric Prince is talking about sending people back on airplanes and that sort of thing. And I'm like, you know, I messaged to Eric immediately. I said, we need to use ships right? We got incredible waterways in the United States. It's one of the reasons we're so wealthy. We can bring ships up from the Great Lakes down to Venezuela. You know what I'm saying? I mean, you can send passenger ships up to Memphis. There's a passenger terminal there for cruises. We can have ships all inside the guts of the United States, putting hundreds of thousands of people per month on these ships. We've only deported less than 70,000 in the first 100 days, which is nothing. That's maybe 1/30th of what we need to be doing. They're having babies at a very high rate, right? And Carlos Arello, who's down in the Darien right now, is just helping him out get down there, and another person is down there in the Darien. But Carlos and Anthony Rubin, they went all over the United States knocking on doors of new migrante who have come through, right? And they knocked on hundreds of doors. It took them months, but almost every household that they knocked on had new babies, right? So what do I think about Trump? Look, people say we don't have enough resources for the mass deportations, but, we're clearly steaming to war with Iran, right? And by the way, huge amounts of Iranians have come through the Darien Gap. I have a lot of them on video. HIAS was the #1 helper through the Darien for Iranians and others. The Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, where Mayorkas was a board member on. Let me repeat that crystal clear. Alejandro Mayorkas, the Department of Homeland Security chief at that time, had been a board member on HIAS, Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society. They have a website, HIAS.org, on which there is a letter congratulating him from Mayorkas. Him is Alejandro Mayorkas, or Alex as they used to call him until he went uppity and called himself Alejandro. So Alex went from HIAS, the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, to being the head of Homeland Security. Now, he came down to that camp where HIAS has an office in Darien. I almost leased that office, but they got it before I did. So HIAS is right beside the main camp, bringing in Iranians, Chinese, that's why I call it China camp, Afghans. HIAS is right there. They're in all the camps. I have many, many videos. I used to eat breakfast with HIAS down there until they figured out who I was. I mean, we ate breakfast at the same restaurant in the morning, the Tenose Hotel, for those who are in Darien. That's where they ate breakfast, right beside their office, which is right beside China camp, which is exactly where Alejandro Mayorkas came with 4 Blackhawks. I had waited for 4 days. He landed right in front of me. I was physically present. He came, he increased the size of the camps. And keep in mind, Alejandro Mayorkas himself is he is the son of migrants who came from Cuba, Sephardic Jews. That's how he ended up in HIAS. So when I've said this on speeches and whatnot, like, when you start getting wiped out on golf courses in West Palm Beach and whatnot, when Jewish people's synagogues are getting blown up in the United States, remember what I said. Look on HIAS.org and look at all the Shapiros and Pritzkers and whatnot who are donating to this, right? They need to be shut down. When I called out Ben Shapiro publicly numerous times, he just equivocates. He never comes out and says, no, he will never say something bad about HIAS. They are invading the United States with the very people who will kill them, right?
And this is why the invasion has basically slowed, if not stopped, right? By comparison.
Slowed, dramatically slowed.
But
through the Darien, it's less than 1% of what it was.
But the deportations, if you look at Biden's last year in office, while the invasion is still happening, right? He deported on average 22,000 a month. Biden removed 22,000 a month. Trump's pace now in his first 100-day pace is only 19,700 per month, which means the removals that Trump is doing is at a pace that's actually slower than what was done under Biden. Now, I find that shocking.
Well, Trump is part of the big game. It's clear. I mean, Trump has shut the border, has he? He's shut the border, but they're inside breeding. And they'll tell you, many of the, some of the Islamists will say that we will invade through the wombs of our women, right? And so, I mean, there you go. I mean, they say it outright often, very often. That's a frequent statement. And so they're breeding very quickly within the United States. And so we're not doing mass deportations. It's not even, the deportations that have been done to date are not even noteworthy, really. It's about 1/30th of what we need. And now keep in mind, Laken Riley was murdered by somebody who passed through those camps. They were definitely helped by HIAS and IOM and Doctors Without Morals and Red Cross and Norwegian refugee councils. But HIAS is the main arm down there that's, HIAS actually helped the murderer of Laken Riley. I checked on the records. I see what day he came in on. I see what bus he got on. His brothers came months later. They were together. They got on the same bus. They came across, through the Darien Gap, helped by HIAS, IOM, United Nations. And we haven't done anything to HIAS, nothing. We haven't defunded them. We haven't defunded United Nations. It's all a farce. Right now, I have a friend, well, actually, I can say it now. He just got to Spain. I have a friend who was just in Africa, and as of yet, he was being threatened yesterday in Africa. But IOM is operating there right now. They're operating right now, and they are still flooding Europe, right? Now, keep in mind, just because our flows are low at the moment, very low compared to what they were, again, the breeding is going on, and all these structures, the plumbing is in place. All we've seen is the spigot has been squeezed down. Now, keep in mind, the spigot also got squeezed down during the COVID time, right? Nobody got through the Darien Gap for more than a year. I mean, that was the tightest it ever was during COVID. So it was obvious that it could be closed down. And so, but then it opened back up to epic levels that we've never seen before. So I got there after they opened it back up after COVID, back when 200 a day was a huge number. And that's why I kept parking down there months on end saying it's going to be a lot more. This is going to be a major invasion route. I published this, said it so many times. And then the next thing you know, we got 89,000 came through in 1 month. And in 2023, about 550,000 came through that I have records of, right? And more than 25,000 of those were Chinese. Keep in mind, the Chinese are colonizing Panama. They're colonizing the United States. They're colonizing Canada, which is effectively, and India's colonizing Canada. Colonization has many faces, right? And some of it is government sponsored, and some of it is just people doing their thing. And so, like, Panama has huge sections now that are Chinese. But when you say that to Panamanians, they get really upset. They're like, we're not being colonized. I'm from Panama and yada, yada, yada. I always hear that, I'm from Texas and we got things under control. It's like, listen, when I open an office in Texas, that should tell you something. If I am in your country or your state, that's not a good sign. That's like death knocking on your door. And I've been warning the Texans so many times. Todd Bensman was the first one that told me about Colony Ridge, north of Houston. Colony Ridge, right? So Colony Ridge, we went out there one day in Texas, and it's a huge colony for 200,000 people. It's a city that's been built from scratch, multi-billion-dollar city. We went out there and saw it, put the drones in the air. It was too big to see with the drones. Came back tried to get a helicopter, couldn't get one, came back with an airplane. And we're looking over this thing. I'm like, this is unbelievable. I'm going to come back with some congressmen and yada, yada. So I came back, got a helicopter from a great American there named Dave Cannon, gave us his helicopter, made many flights for me, took up Epoch Times, Daily Wire, a couple congressmen, took up a lot of people, right? And put that on the map and said, look, Governor Abbott is getting money from the developer of Colony Ridge, whose name was Trey Harris, right? And he was just with Trey Harris. They're still buddies today, right? He wasn't with him. He could have been with him today. I don't know. But he was with him recently. And so I've been over the entire U.S. southern border from edge to edge, from Boca Chica at SpaceX to San Diego, right? And so it took months. I mean, I'm very familiar with that border. And I'm very familiar with when Abbott would go to the border and say, hey, we're closing the border. It was complete nonsense. I mean, they would have all the National Guard and they're unfurling the barbed wire, the razor wire and all that. And I'm like, I'm just right over here watching you guys and they're crossing right here. All the cameras are pointing, just turn the cameras this way. I mean, it's so total acting show. And then Abbott would get those buses full and all the cameras would be watching as they send them up to, I don't know, Massachusetts or wherever, New York. And my Texan friends would be going, see, Abbott's doing it.
That
We're right. You know, you're wrong about Abbott. And I'm like,
that
no, I'm
show
not. Why doesn't he
that's
send them back to Texas? You see, with those same buses, you could send them to Mexico. Mexico is where they came through. Send them to Mexico, not Massachusetts, because Massachusetts is actually the United States, right? And so he's clearing the banks of the Rio Grande for more to come through. Right now, Abbott, I see my messages blowing up this morning. Some town in Texas is very upset, small town, because $4 million apparently of their money is going off to help Israel, right? And they're like, we don't want to be involved in this. Our own town is in trouble. And Abbott has come back and he published a letter. You can see the letter. It's online now. He's actually threatening them. He's actually threatening them, openly threatening that that's anti-Semitic, you know, that you basically don't want to give your other kidney to Israel. You can't make up this stuff. Abbott is on the World Economic Forum website. He is one of them, as is Trump. Trump is not one of us. He is one of them. He's just one of the actors in the movie, right? So Biden comes in, opens the gates. Trump says, oh, close the gate. Closes the gate, but he doesn't deport, right? And he leaves the entire invasion infrastructure in place. What does that portend? All compass needles are pointing towards this invasion will continue later. Now, keep in mind, daylight's burning. We're going to have the midterms before we know it, right? And then we'll probably lose a lot of influence. Well, the influence is being used against us now. We're about to go into war with Iran. You saw the bombing this morning, and in the of the Bandar Abbas, right? I mean, the things are kicking off, right? And remember what wars do. They do some things highly predictably. Wars grow. Wars grow. They grow. That's what wars do. And they grow unpredictably, just like fire, and they last longer than people expect. Keep in mind, again, we just let huge numbers of Iranians and many, many others through the Darien Gap. Just through the Darien Gap, about 1.4 million just during Biden's time. That doesn't include the flows that started further up, like, for instance, in Mexico or Guatemala. Many started in Nicaragua, actually, which is, you know, upstream from, or let's say downstream from the Darien Gap. They're closer to the United States. Many have come through Canada. Canada's wide open. Many come through Bahamas. Bahamas is finally hitting the news. We went to Bahamas, I don't know, maybe 2 years ago.
Let me ask you a related question.
The huge port off the coast of Florida that China has built, and that many of the Chinese that are invading the United States are coming up on the beaches of Florida. Obviously, many are coming on student visas. Many are coming through birth tourism in the territories out in the Pacific. I mean, it goes on and on and on. And so at the end of the day, what Trump is doing is an obvious kayfabe. The invasions are clearly not over, unless, you know, the people that are still drinking the Kool-Aid, good luck to you. Have fun. You're probably going to die. I mean, this is not a joke. We are being invaded. It's not over. The infrastructure is all in place. Europe is still being invaded. Ireland, you know, Sako Ganaha and I went to Ireland.
Let me talk to you about the U.S. first, real quick.
Suddenly, that's finally on the map, but I think they've already crossed the demographic Rubicon. I think it's too late for Ireland, unless they suddenly, you know, everybody has twice the testosterone they have now and defend themselves. I get messages from Ireland daily, like they're asking for help. Help. We're not even helping ourselves. I mean, we're not even helping. Canada is the greatest threat to the United States. Actually, at this point, is probably Canada. We went up in Canada and looked at that for more than a month. Look, the Canadian Army already has trained with the PLA, the People's Liberation Army. Chinese Army have openly trained. Well, at first they kept it secret, it leaked out, but they've trained in uniform in Canada. I mean, in Canada as being, I think for North America, you're going to end up seeing, you're going to see a war, I think, in Canada between Indians and Chinese. It'll be Indians fighting Indians, you know, Sikhs versus Hindus. They're already duking it up there. And it'll be Hindus versus Hindus also, and Sikhs versus Sikhs, because they got those internal things going on. And with the Chinese, obviously, Chinese fight each other a lot too. So it'll be Chinese versus Chinese, but on a larger scale, going up another 10,000 feet on the map, it'll be Indians fighting Chinese, right? And obviously Pakistanis, that war with Pakistan is, obviously it's starting to pop and simmer right now over and like Kashmir and other places. And now that will obviously happen also in Canada and the United States and Europe. These fights are not reserved for the battleground where they start, because remember what wars do. They spread unpredictably, and they last longer than people think. Part of the battlegrounds will be in our cities and towns. That's the way our Revolutionary War and whatnot, they were extensions of the wars that we were having in Europe, right? They were historical extensions. And that continues to this day in one way or another.
Michael, let me ask you a question. What do you make of
I'll
Trump's?
go on for an hour. I mean, there's so
I
much
know.
to
I'm
talk
sorry.
about.
I know.
You
I know.
asked me what I thought
know you
about
do.
Trump, and we ended up in Kashmir.
I know. I know. I tried to stop you, but earlier, but it's all interesting stuff. But I'm really
I
curious.
can't hear you. I can't hear you at
me?
all.
Can't hear me? I don't know.
Are you muted, or
Should be
I
able to
can't hear
me.
you?
Yeah, seems like
Oh,
it's
I
working.
can hear you.
Yeah.
Why can't I hear you? Let me take this off. All right, let me try this. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yeah,
Okay, now I hear
just
you.
fine. Okay.
So I haven't been able to hear you. Then that means since I plugged this cord in. So if you tried to interrupt me and I seemed rude, it was
That's
because
what it was. Okay. No problem at all. So the question is, what do you make of Trump's move to put the DOD in charge of like a 171-mile stretch along the Mexican border and make, basically, I mean, what's that about? And of course, they can easily expand it because I guess it's the Roosevelt Reservation, which runs another 632 miles further. So, but they've started with this 171 miles. Now, it's like
Right.
6 miles on each side, or 60 foot on each side is now DOD zone. Military law applies. They're in charge. Now the flows of migrants have stopped, but they're doing this now. What do you make of it?
Again, the first thought is a couple things. One is the organizational structure that's being developed Trump is like a leaf on a tree, and he won't be there much longer anyway, but that organizational structure will be in place, right? And Trump himself is obviously not trustworthy whatsoever, right? I mean, seriously. I mean, how much more evidence do we need, Mr. Jab, right? Oh, Fauci fooled him. Okay, we get it. So, but I mean, he can't be trusted. He's clearly not on our side. And so, what do I think of it? This has, and I as soon as that happened, I put it on Twitter or X or whatever, and I said, think this through before you jump on the bandwagon and say, oh, this is great. Trump is taking action. I said, just think it through, go to sleep, and think about it. Go for a walk and think about the implications of this. They have severe implications. Many people have said since before Trump that any wall down there will be designed to keep us in. Of course, those were conspiracy theorists, the same sort of people that warned about the jabs, conspiracy theorists, right? I mean, we are in a different world now than a lot of people imagine. Clearly, our government is predatory towards us. I mean, you talk about this all the time. That's why you're talking to me from South America, right? You know this, and the people that pay attention to your program know this very well, that our government's predatory towards us. If they wanted to just keep people out, why would they need to make that a military reservation? They don't need it. They don't need it. Why did they do that? I'm suspicious.
Yeah, militarizing the border is new. That's new. So it concerns me.
Yeah.
Michael, what's going to happen? Write a little bit of science fiction for us here, the way you see this evolving over the next 5 years. I mean, all these people that are in the US illegally, they're not being exported fast enough. So what are they going to do? I mean, is it going to be an armed military thing, or is it going to be an attack on the infrastructure more subtly? Well, what's actually going to happen kinetically?
Well, one thing, we have to look at this thing holistically, right? Because there's not the invasion is not separate from the attacks on, I know this may sound crazy to some people, but not to you two, like the attacks on Nord Stream and closing of Groningen gas field. Actually, I was on Jordan Peterson maybe 3 years ago with Ava Vlardingerbroek, and I think Ava and I think both agreed that about Groningen gas fields. She just messaged me this morning. Actually, she's in Italy right now, so Ava is quite smart, and she's Dutch, and she saw that, you know, the migration issues. She's talked about it extensively, and she sees how these things are connected, which is rare. You know that most people can't see that these things are actually very closely connected. So when I talk about Nord Stream, and I'm talking about people coming over the border in Texas, to me, those are absolutely not separate. When I talk about the Panama Canal and the people coming over the border in Texas, those are absolutely not separate. Panama Canal and Groningen, not separate. Nord Stream, this is all the same, right?
What about COVID?
All part of that, right? It's the same players, right? It's the same players. Bill Gates with his mosquitoes, everybody pushing all these big players like Trump pushing the jab, and there's people out there that are amazingly whatever they are. I mean, some of my family and friends amazingly drinking the Kool-Aid, right? And think that Fauci actually fooled Trump, that Trump is actually so stupid that in 2025, we're almost in May 2025, and he's still sticking with the jab. That is ultra stupid, or he's one of them. It's one of the other or both, right? So you can't have Trump is playing 5D chess or whatever it is now, how many dimensions it's up to. Maybe it's 7D chess now, and still have him fooled by Fauci in 2025. That just, you know, the equation doesn't reconcile. You know what I mean? You know, when people start off with it must equal X, and then they design the equation to, you know, Trump is our hero. So it's all related, right? And so like Nord Stream, how did Masako and I predict Nord Stream? We predicted Groningen in advance, very publicly in front of millions of people, and predicted it. We were in Germany at BASF in advance, thinking that BASF would be targeted, and boom, Nord Stream went out 14 days later, right? Attacked, right? And people are like, why would the Russians take out Nord Stream? Let me tell you, there's only two suspects on the suspect list of who took out Nord Stream. It was either Americans or space aliens. That's it. One or the other, right? And unless, you know, space aliens did it and we paid them or something. And so at the end of the day, these are all related. It's about destroying the nation states, such as Japan, such as Australia, Kiwi land down there, United States, of course, Canada. It's about, we're talking giant oligarchical structures are fighting each other, including
Russia? What about Russia, Ukraine?
That's all part of it. I mean, this, like,
will it end? Will it, if it's part of it, will it end? I mean, if Trump is questionable, I mean, is there really going to be a resolution?
Well, Trump is a Zionist. He's openly Zionist, right? He doesn't hide it. So this isn't conspiracy theory. He's like openly Zionist, right? And so Zionism is not Judaism, of course. I'm not sure what the majority of Zionists are. Are they Christians, or are they, there's actually Zionist Muslims, believe it or not. Like a lot of Kurds are Zionists. And believe it or not, I've spent a lot of time with them. And there's a lot of Jews that are Zionists. There's a lot of Jews who hate Zionists. Zionism has different, you know, components as well, who fight each other like crazy. A lot of Zionists are actually atheists, like Brett Weinstein. I took to the Darien Gap. Very smart man. He's an atheist. He tells you that all the time. And he's a Zionist, right? So, I mean, Zionism isn't Judaism. It is a oligarchical structure. It is a, I sent it to Japan. I have actually a share here for Theodore Herzl was one of the founders of, you know, the founding, you know, taking the Palestinian lands, right? I have a share that I bought where I bought these French bonds. I bought a share in the Palestine Project, and from 1899, right? So they were raising money to, you know, to take that land, right? So that movement's been going on for a long time. Why is all this related? First of all, the Zionists want to destroy our nation states, and they want to take Ukraine, right? They want Gaza. There's a lot of gas off of Gaza. You can create the greater Israel with that. Take the Suez Canal, Bab al-Mandeb, Strait of Hormuz. The attack has just begun on Iran, like open attack, right? I mean, the smoke, the flames are going as we speak. It's on fire, right? And so,
No, wait a minute. Who's launched that attack? The Israelis or the Americans?
so far people say it's the Israelis, but you know, I know Eric Kurilla, by the way, the CENTCOM commander. I was in combat with him for 5 months, super aggressive and super on the Zionist side, right? And he was a super jab pusher. He was outstanding in combat, but as a battalion commander, he got shot in front of me actually. Now he's the CENTCOM commander, and you can see Eric has been in the news a lot lately for things. Anyway, so it's Eric that's working with the Israelis directly, right? As the CENTCOM commander, Central Command, right? So I can't call up Eric anymore and ask him because, you know, I've said some bad things about his jab pushing. And I know how Eric is with that. He will not sit well with it, right? You know, I spent 5 months with him. And so highly aggressive. He ended up, you know, being in JSOC and all, 82nd Airborne Commander. He's top dog, right? And a lot of people thought he would become the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. He didn't get that spot, so I think he's going to retire from CENTCOM and probably go work for Israel or something. I don't know. But in any case, it looks like it was, I don't know who. I'm going to guess the Iranians did the actual trigger pulling, but that would have been with huge support from the United States, obviously, right? And so obviously Israel and the United States are like this, right? At least with the current, you know, Trump administration. So that war will get out of hand because that's what wars do. It's growing. Now, keep in mind, what's going on there is directly related to here. A lot of Zionists are here in, I mean, they basically, Chinese and Zionists are some of the main influencers of Panama. So the battles that you see here in Panama, a lot of it is actually between Zionists and Chinese. Now, let me say why. For instance, BlackRock, Larry Fink, CEO, he's Israeli. He's also got an American passport. He's straight up Israeli, right? And so he wants to continue the invasions of the United States. Larry Fink says this with his mouth. He said it like maybe 5 weeks ago on an interview. He's like, he wants to keep going. He was super DEI, super jab guy, and super Israel. He's a Zionist, right? So Trump is trying to give those two ports on the sides of the Panama Canal to BlackRock. Now, a lot of the Americans who are here who don't want China to have the canal, don't want China to have even ports on the canal. When Trump was pushing that to BlackRock, which is basically, you know, a Zionist company, not explicitly 100%. I mean, you know, a lot of Americans here that are actually pro-Israel are actually like, whoa, we shouldn't be giving that to BlackRock. Out of all the companies in the world, why would BlackRock take the, well, I mean, it's, again, let me go back to what I was saying on the big picture. It's all related, right? Suez Canal. When the attacks on Gaza are partly for that gas off of Gaza, but also the Suez Canal is nearby, and clearly, and eventually we're going to end up in war with Egypt, I think. And let me show you something here. You know, look at this. I got this painting the other day.
Stop spending $4 billion a year. Can't do that.
More than that. You know who that is? That's Ben Gurion, painted on one of the bonds, one of the old bonds. That's Ben Gurion, you know, founder, Mr. Israel, right? Now, there's been thoughts for many years of building a Ben Gurion canal through Israel. And where will it come out at? By Gaza, right? And the Ben Gurion Canal will be sort of a parallel canal to Suez. So, but you would still need to be able to use Bab al-Mandeb, which the Houthis have been very successful at interdicting, right? So we've been bombing the Houthis, but they apparently managed to almost shoot down an F-18 recently by, if it's true, making our aircraft carrier turn so quickly to avoid incoming that a F-18 flew off the aircraft carrier. I mean, you can't make up this stuff. So the Houthis, you know, in their sandals are causing, you know, our Fifth Fleet to do whatever. And so, but meanwhile, we're opening up a front now with Iran. Now, keep in mind, 7 major naval choke points in the world. This is the number one, Panama, for the United States, right? Suez Canal is one of the 7. Bab al-Mandeb is one of the 7. Strait of Hormuz is one of the 7, right? So that's 4. Clearly, a fight between Zionist and Chinese is happening here, right, in Panama, and between Zionist and Chinese and others for Suez, right? Egypt is operating it now, and Zionist and Houthis for Bab al-Mandeb, and Zionist and Iranians and others who later will clearly get involved for Strait of Hormuz, right? So this is, and obviously huge Zionists openly want the war in Ukraine to continue. It's open. Like when I was just down in Argentina, 5 months ago, it's clear that you've got a Zionist versus Chinese thing forming there. I can see it. It's crystal clear. When I went to the CPAC down there in Buenos Aires, they started with Viva, Argentina, Viva Estados Unidos, and Viva Israel, right? I mean, that was the opening words of the CPAC. So these are some of the oligarchical systems that are fighting each other. One is a Zionist oligarchical system, but they have internal fights there. It's not like it's a monolith. And then there's the Chinese as well, the Chinese Communist Party in particular, because the Chinese are not a monolith either, right? So there's all these internal things going on. But at the same time, the main structures in some of these fights are Chinese versus Zionist, and Zionist versus Chinese, of course, and Russians. And so, and you know how these things get all muddled, and they might support each other on one thing and fight on another. Another obviously important area is Strait of Malacca, which was near where you were in Singapore, and in Thailand, of course. And as you know, there's been long talk for many years of building the canal on the Kra Isthmus in Thailand, near where you were last year, Doug. And now they're working on the train. That train comes all the way down from China, and they're building it. It's already past Bangkok now, right? And so,
Michael, the way you spin this, and I think you're correct, it seems like there's almost no way out of a lot of wars heating up. In other words, like the end of the 1930s, as a prelude to World War II, we're looking at, well, we're already in World War III with all these wars, but they're all going to get bigger. Am I right?
clearly.
Oh,
I mean,
so
remember, wars grow.
Where do you go? Where do you physically go? Because you don't want to be involved in this shit when it comes down, personally.
No. I mean, I think that you have picked a wise starting point down there. Very wise. But
I think
there's no. Go ahead.
Jane is one of like 8 Chinese people in the country, by the way. So there's not much Chinese here.
You mean in Uruguay?
Yeah.
Yeah. Because Doug, I don't know if
When they see her,
in Uruguay.
people
right
here
now,
like they come up to her and they've never seen a Chinese person before, and they want to meet her.
But they're clearly moving slowly on Argentina. Next door. But that like for instance, the Bioceanic Corridor, Masako and I, we went up there and looked at that and rode on their little electric train and that sort of thing. And again, they let Masako into the front of the train, just came back and asked us that Japanese privilege. And so, these fights are global. They're not, but you know what this is this is just an annual flower blooming. Well, not necessarily annual, but it never stops. So the whole global. Go ahead,
The fourth turning form of blooming, essentially.
Yeah, but I mean, you look at, for instance, the book that you're reading now, The Path Between the Seas, a book that everybody should read. Anybody who's serious about global strategy should read that book, and Alfred Mann, of course, and quite a lot of others. But you can see, like in the book that you read, you'll see that when this canal, they wanted to open a path between the seas for 500 years here, right? That's how the Scottish ended up going bankrupt here in 1698-ish, 1699, right? Because they sold their own bonds, to make that path down in Darien. And they went bankrupt, and that's how Scotland got absorbed by the United Kingdom in the Articles of Union in 1706, 1707, right? That's why Scotland is part of the United Kingdom today. Though Scottish they're not taught that in their history books, apparently, because when I bring it up to them, most of them don't know that they are part of the United Kingdom today because they tried to make a path between the seas in the Darien, which is, Panama, back in the late 1698, 99. They lost about 2,000 people dead, went bankrupt, and now they're under the king of England. And so, so many people tried to make a path between the seas. One of the old forts that was overrun is down the street from me, Old Panama. And so for 500 years, they tried to make this path between the seas because this place is so vital. And now somebody's going to take it. Now, a lot of the Panamanians seem to think it's ours and it's ours and it's ours. I tell them all the time, you're just the latest sediment of colonizers, period, full stop. Before you were here, it was Spaniards, and before and before that, it was Indians fighting each other. It was Kuna fighting, Imbra or whatever, right? And so now the latest sediment is coming in. It's clearly a lot of Zionists, a lot of Arabs, a lot of Chinese. The sediment is building up. The major influences here in Panama City politically appear to be Zionist and Chinese behind the scenes. The face of it is mostly of Latin descent, but and many blacks too. For instance, the mayor of Darien, I've talked with her quite a lot, had lunch with her a couple times. She's black. She told me a couple months ago, she's like, most of Darien, she said Darien used to be almost all black. And
There's
then,
people from Barbados that were brought over, right?
yeah, but remember, before that, it was Indians. And before it was Spaniards. Then it was Indians, then the Spaniards came, and then the blacks came, and then it's 500 years of sediment, right? And the latest sediment's falling from the water right now.
Well, maybe just as in geology, sedimentary rocks eventually are metamorphosized when they're crushed under heat and pressure. And we're going to see a lot of heat and pressure in the future. So we'll have a geological event taking place with people. But, Michael, listen, you travel about as much as I used to. And I'm asking myself, maybe it's about time you showed up in China again, because China isn't back a lot of these things the way you said. But at the same time, I get indications that the Chinese economy is in really big trouble at this point, which could do two things. It could make them want to be more aggressive, or it could force them to be less aggressive. So are you going back to China to get some boots on the ground to what's happening there? Are you planning on that?
I spent a lot of time in China, but if I were to go back now, I would need some under the wing of the government or with official permission from the Chinese, because I think they would arrest me actually at this point.
Yeah, you'd be persona non grata, I suspect, at this point.
They kicked me out of Hong Kong, as you know.
Yeah, you're probably wise not going back there. So where other than Panama, where is the next place that would be good for you to be boots on the ground other than China? The Middle East, perhaps, you think?
Yeah, but it's so global now. This is the most important. Well, what's the most important? Your left knee, your right knee. You know what I mean? Your heart. This is. But the Panama Canal is something that we can definitely affect. But I see Trump policies are not really doing anything. They're just shuffling stuff around. And I'm staying at the hotel where Pete Hegseth stayed, by the way, and that's where I'm at now, actually. And I just don't see any changes happening. I see a lot of kayfabe, I see a lot of acting going on, but I'm not seeing solid stuff. Now I'm going to go back to Japan soon and see what's going on in Japan, back with Misako. And rummage around Asia a bit, but probably won't be China. Now, keep in mind, I know people in China, and I get updates quite a lot, and it sounds like they may be having some serious economic problems. There's different ways to tell. The airports, obviously, and well, I don't know. We'll see, because at the end of the day, we need to watch and see how the economic. And we just have to wait and see. As you know, you've been studying this all your life. At some point, we just have to see how it really shakes out. Yeah.
What do you think is the biggest, what's the next shoe to drop? What's the next big thing?
One thing that I'm very concerned about is famine and blackouts. And keep in mind, I've been warning about famine since about,
let's talk about blackouts first in light of Spain and what that means. What do you make of that situation?
I don't know what actually caused it, but obviously I don't, and there was a blackout here actually about 2 months ago, right? And a month and a half maybe. And in fact, most of the lights went out in Panama City and a lot of it across Panama. And interestingly, a couple of months ago, before that, a couple of months before the blackout, 2 or 3 months, I published, I think on my Substack that, if America is gonna attack, it's probably gonna be like, I don't know, March 14th, March 12th, something like that. And I had reasons for it. And in that, and of course, there would probably be blackouts and communication disruption. But suddenly, interestingly, it was almost a full moon because we would probably do it on a full moon or a very dark moon, depending on what the commanders wanted, unless it was just political or whatever reasons for timing. But so I'm sitting here watching it's a beautiful full moon, and I'm like, well, the skies are clear. I mean, this would be one of those times, and then boom, all the lights go out. I was like, wow. I mean, here we go. Maybe I don't see any jets flying low. I don't hear anything going on. I don't see any missiles flying through the sky. And the Panamanians freaked out because the electricity went out through a large part of all of Panama. And so it turned out it was some small explosion and a key place in a power plant. And but a lot of the Panamanians thought we were attacking. I didn't know, of course, the generators for my hotel turned back on. I still had communication, so that made me think there was no attack on. But at the end of the day, why did the power go out? I don't know. I mean, that was right around the time when there was some heated stuff going on between, on the Black Rock port thing here. And so was it, keep in mind, there was an electrical blackout in Ecuador right after Ecuador was, threatening Chinese, you needed a visa to come into Ecuador, and boom, blackout, right? And then,
Well, that's the interesting thing about Spain is because the PM went to visit China on like the 11th or 12th of April. So he comes back, so after all these tariffs are announced, and literally Besant said something about Spain cutting its own throat if they chose to side with the Chinese, goes to China, comes back, blackout. Now, coincidence, perhaps.
Coincidence. I mean, but if you were, the thing is if I were going to design a famine, and I've published this many times, what would I do? I would take out Nord Stream. I would take out Groningen. I would do many, many other things like make sure these screwworms get back to the United States, which they are now, working their way up, which is, again, I predicted that 3.5 years ago, screwworms, and now they're in the news quite often. And so I would do many, many things. I would set conditions for it first.
I have
right?
another one for you that adds to your list. To break off relations so badly between Canada and the U.S. when the U.S. imports 70% of its fertilizer from Canada.
Yeah, there you go. And so do all these things. And it takes years to set the conditions, just like it took years to build the canal, right? And so I would right now, there's not the fertilizers are more expensive than they have been. And I mean, as you know, the prices go up and down. You can check, but at the end of the day, people are using less fertilizer. A lot of people are. Like when I talk with little farmers around here, a lot of them actually have already gone out of business. So you might not notice that in America, but little resiliencies have diminished in places all over the place, such as in Thailand, right? Although Thailand remains pretty resilient, but and Thailand is very dependent on nitrogenous fertilizers, and they import more than 90% of their nitrogenous fertilizers, right? So anyway, what would I do? I would set conditions if I were trying to create famine, and if I were trying to use that famine to destroy countries, because if you study famines, I've never been in a big famine, so I've only read a couple dozen books on them because famine and war are very closely related. Pandemic, famine, and war are very tightly related, like a triangle and like a fire triangle.
The apocalypse, of course.
That's right. I mean, right out of the Bible. I mean, straight up. It's funny because I used to say that, and one of my readers said years ago, she said, "You talk about this as if you made it up," and I said, "I did." She said, "No, it's in the Bible." I was like, "Wow, I plagiarized the Bible." I mean, if you're gonna plagiarize, go big, and I just probably didn't realize where I got it from. And but the and so at the end of the day, those things go together. So what would I do if I were trying to destroy the United States and many other countries simultaneously? If you look in the 1840s, the Hungry 40s, there were famines all over Europe, and many of the governments were, that's it. I mean, you have a famine and your government's probably not going to last. It's a very low chance your government's going to last. So I would set conditions for famine. I would open up things like the Darien Gap, right? And so that people could flow through, because famine, pandemic, and war create something called HOP, human osmotic pressure. The human osmotic pressure is the push and the pull of migration. So that HOP, that human osmotic pressure, is intense during famine. So what would I do if I wanted to destroy the United States and many other countries at once? I would spend years setting conditions for this. I would kill the chickens. I would burn down the beef processing places. I would do all these things. I would reduce resiliency with fertilizers and that sort of thing. And finally, I would do blackouts, and that would be it. Your resilience would be very low, and Planet of the Apes, people are going to flood to where the food is, right? And if you've got a road through the Darien, you can have huge numbers of people. You can have ships coming up the Mississippi that the globalists are sending, up the Mississippi River, right? I mean, we can be invaded by huge numbers of millions, far greater than we've seen so far. What I've seen so far with the United Nations and whatnot is they're still developing their infrastructure. Trump has not gone after them. We're basically, if you imagine the United Nations as a giant squid, we're basically slapping at the end of its tentacles and saying, bad squid, bad squid. We're not going after the squid's head, right? We're going after bad squid. Stop that. We're slapping one or two of the tentacles, right? Keep in mind, I've got these books right here. I'm going to meet the author later today, actually. I got 5 of these books she wrote. These are in Spanish, but this is a Chinese lady who lives in Panama wrote these, and they're talking about the, great relations between Panama and China, right, for 3 centuries, right? And in these books, China is bragging about how they use the United Nations to take the canal from the United States, right? They're bragging about it in Spanish, right? And I'm going to be talking with her about it today, actually. And so they're doing the same right now with Diego Garcia. China is openly trying to take Diego Garcia from the United Kingdom and give it to Mauritius. And then they can just take it from Mauritius. And then we're out of the Indian Ocean at Diego Garcia, which will be used to attack Iran. So I'm not sure that's a bad thing on its face. But it is a bad thing because China will end up owning Diego Garcia. So these things, what do I see? The United Nations continues to build. We continue to fund it, right? We continue to fund the United Nations. The United States is the biggest funder of the United Nations. They're operating everywhere. We have closed the border to the United States for now, like a water spigot. Okay, so the Trump people are happy, and for now. And then, boom, when they turn that spigot back on, right now, Amy Pope, she's on her Twitter every day, running around to the Vatican, running around to Chile and Haiti and Jordan and all over the place. And she continues to arrange the structure. Now, keep in mind, right now, as we speak, IOM is sending Africans and Middle Easterners to Europe. So the invasions are not over, just reduced on our border. And then Trump has used this to militarize our border. I mean, you can't make up this stuff. And yet, people are still buying into it. And so what do I think is going to happen? I'm guessing, and I've been warning about famine for 5 years. I think, again, how were Masako and I able to predict Nord Stream and Groningen and the Darien Gap and that Panama Canal would end up being a fight? Because we've developed a working model that never leaves us surprised by X, Y, or Z, because if you're surprised, then your paradigm is off, right? If you're surprised, like, I didn't think he would do such and such, or that would happen, then you need to look at your paradigm, maybe throw it out the window or just tweak it or whatever until you're never surprised. And it's highly predictive. How could we predict way over the horizon that Nord Stream was going to get disrupted, that Groningen would be cut. Not only did they cut the biggest gas field in Europe, they actually destroyed it, filled it with concrete and that sort of thing. How were we able to predict the screwworms or that the Darien Gap? Because our model is working. It's highly predictive. What do I think? I think we're going to end up seeing famines. I think we're going to end up seeing huge famines, and we're going to see massive invasions. That's what I think. I think we're
You know
going
what
to
makes
see
that worse?
blackouts.
You know what makes that
Blackouts.
worse and more urgent? If these tariffs stay on longer, farmers will not plant because they will not plant as much because if they cannot count on exports to China, they're going to alter their planting schedule this spring.
Think of the implications. You are thinking of the implications. That's why you just mentioned it. Yeah, I mean, these are sophisticated players, and they make mistakes like everybody else, but they adjust to their mistakes, and they, for instance, the yellow fever. If you web search my name in yellow fever, look how many times I've mentioned yellow fever in Darien. Look how many times I've mentioned it over the last 3 or 4 years, probably 4 years, right? And now yellow fever, boom. In the last about 10 days, they're announcing that there's some deaths down in the Darien from yellow fever. I mean, this is all part of a bigger game, and they're already vaccinating people down the Darien. It's clear that Panama, for instance, is going to be ethnically cleansed. I can see that. You say that to Panamanians, and seriously, you're going to lift up the emotional level to the point where it could get dangerous. But that's what I'm seeing. So I'm not saying this for the people that go, oh, that can never happen or whatever. I'm saying this for the more sophisticated people that you can adjust yourself. The more sophisticated people, I would say, I would plan on. This is why I'm not really high on Panama, unless you've just got money that you're willing to risk, because it is a nice lily pad to come and go from. But I don't see long-term stability here. I think there's going to be a huge fight for this canal because it's a juicy sheep wearing, pork chops around its neck while predators are surrounded. This is going to be a fight, right? Just like you're going to see for Suez, Bab al-Mandeb, and Strait of Hormuz. I mean, that attack. Now, when you see this war kick off with Iran, which at this point it'll probably grow. Let's see if it does, and because wars grow, but you see that chokehold there that affects everybody. Iraq, for instance, their oil exports. They go through these two oil platforms called Abbott and Kayat. I've been on top of both of those oil platforms. Went out there by a helicopter and got on some British ships and ended up on both of them. They're right next to Iranian waters. And I mean right next to Iranian waters. Like one of those oil platforms is so close to Iranian waters, they can literally, on those little Iranian boats, they can hit the oil platform with an arrow. Like really, no exaggeration. You could hit it with an arrow. I mean, and that's how close all this stuff is. So a lot of the huge amount of the oil exports, you can see I published about this during the Iraq War. I was the first one that noticed this, and then I went out to the first one that was publishing about it anyway, and I asked to go out there to those oil platforms, and I went out there because I was like, wow, if they cut these oil platforms, then that's the bulk of the economy of Iraq while we're in the middle of the war. And there was actually a bombing on one of the suicide boat, tried to take out one of the platforms, didn't succeed. I think it may have killed a few people in the attack. I don't remember. I wasn't there. And but the point is if you look at where Abbott and Kayat are, and you look at the oil exports coming through the various countries, they're going to have to go through. A lot of it's going through the Strait of Hormuz, right? And the Strait of Hormuz is not very wide, and so that will be that war could cause massive problems for energy disruption. Will it do it? I don't know. But what do wars do? They grow, and also that chokes down Russia quite a lot because Russia, of course, needs Iran for various reasons. They need each other. But long story short. Strait of Hormuz, Bab al-Mandeb, Suez, Panama Canal, and then getting over deeper into Asia. Well, then of course you've got the Bosphorus, the Turkish Straits, in that area, in the Strait of Gibraltar, of course. But you get over to Asia, and of course then there's the Strait of Malacca down by Singapore, Indonesia, Malaysia, and you see, like for instance, China is building a canal off of the Mekong now. because the Mekong River dumps out at Vietnam. So Vietnam controls, the trade going up and down the Mekong through the Mekong River Delta, right? So China is building a canal that goes through Cambodia right now, and which will go through the Gulf of Siam, the Gulf of Thailand, and that will then made up with the railway that they're going to build through the Craw Isthmus near where Doug was on vacation last year. So the Craw Isthmus is, the Turtle Isthmus there, and it's the elephant trunk of Thailand, right? They've also thought about building a canal there for, I don't know, 300 or 400 years. I mean, it's always been a dream, but it's a little bit more difficult to build that canal than this one, which was incredibly difficult. And but so right now they're going to start with a railway, it looks like. But once that canal is built off the Mekong, that'll strangle down Vietnam quite a lot because of, anyway, not to go into that. But the bottom line is a lot of these conflicts that are unfolding, these are oligarchical structures that are fighting for these routes and resources. And there's a lot of the people that they want erased off of the planet to be replaced by slaves. Now, the Chinese Communist Party wants the world to be Han Chinese. They want the world to be speaking Mandarin. Keep in mind, Chinese, of course, is not a language. Chinese is a group of languages, just like European is not a language. The Chinese Communist Party wants all the Chinese people. Chinese is also a nebulous term, but they want everybody speaking Mandarin. Like the people in Hong Kong, they don't want them speaking Cantonese. They don't want Fujianese speakers speaking Fujianese, and who in the world's calling me? And
It's kind of like the Ukrainians don't want Russian spoken.
Right. And so the language wars are always a huge thing that goes.
Let me share something with you I just made. I want us to just to demonstrate this whole weird timing thing with Spain. Here's an image. April 9th, Scott Bessent says that Spain is sliding too closely with Beijing, and it was akin to, quote, cutting your own throat. The 10th, Sanchez meets with Xi. 7 bilateral agreements are signed. The 12th, he returns. The 28th, they have a massive power outage. Weird, huh?
Yeah. Yeah, that is strange, isn't it?
That's interesting.
Yeah. It's like if you listen to what these guys say, when I heard Bessent say that, using that expression, it's like cutting their own throat. It was weird. It was out of character. So it stuck with me that he said that.
Yeah, these are massive power plays. And most of the players involved are small and they're going to get elbowed around, right? And
well, they have to pick a side. Everyone's being made to choose a side. If you're a little guy, you got to pick. You're with us or you're against us. This is G.W. Bush times.
It is. And China plays by the same rules. You're with us or you're against us. And like here in Panama, the Panamanians don't want to work with the Chinese, on whole, right? But the United States has basically left a vacuum. And so that's somewhat problematic, as you can imagine. And because, what's interesting about Panama too is, or let's say information war, most Americans a couple of generations ago, I think, understood how important the Panama Canal was. But now even, a lot of what I would call high level thinkers just don't get it because it's just not brought up. It's always focusing somewhere else as opposed to the artery in our neck, right? And, people like Mike Flynn get it. I mean, he messages all the time about it. He wants to know what's going on down there, right? He totally gets it. But most of the others, they're just like, well, it's Panama. There's people that think Panama is an island. Americans who think Panama is actually an island. It's actually a common question. How's the island?
Americans don't know geography unless we've had a recent war there. That's what I think Doug says.
Yeah, that's right. War is nature's way of teaching Americans geography.
Yeah. And the interesting thing is when I was in the Iraq and Afghan wars, I noticed, a lot of Americans would tell me what's going on there, and I would just ask, like, do you know what countries border Iraq? I mean, they wouldn't even know, what I mean? They didn't even bother looking at a map in a lot of cases, but it's really really intense. I mean, the level of distraction is actually quite intense too.
It really is. It's confusing. Doug and I had a podcast the other day just trying to like what's really going on in the world in general. It's hard to know. It's one of the most confusing times. Maybe it's the most confusing time to be alive, partially because of the information we have and because information has been weaponized. But and so much is happening. I mean, the combination of those three make it very difficult. So I guess let me just maybe wrap up question. Michael, what do you do to see through the noise and to not, to keep focused on what matters?
Remove the pump handle, as the epidemiologists would say. I don't watch any MSM whatsoever, but naturally people around me do. So that poison will seep through them into me inevitably. But I don't directly watch it. I go on the ground and look. I mean, I go, to Argentina or to Panama or wherever, and you develop a sight picture that others simply just don't have. Most of the mainstream media, and as you know, I mean, you're both men who study a lot and go places. As you know, once you do and you both read a lot, all three of us read a lot. When you're looking at pillars of knowledge, one is you need to read, and you need to go there and look, and you need to talk with the people. Well, that's what Max is doing, right? Read, go there and look, and go there and do it. In Max's case now, things that you can do. It's not like everybody can just suddenly be an astronaut, but and talk with the people who
Katy Perry
are
did.
expert. What's that?
Katy Perry was an astronaut.
That's right. Katy Perry's all about the astronaut thing, But I mean, look at Max. I mean, Max is doing the ideal. I mean, you and Doug helped Max design his education program. And I think about it quite a lot because that is what young people need to do. And first of all, I would suggest to every young person to go to at least 5 other countries, just 5 that are not. Canada doesn't really count. Well, I guess it does now, but and
Go to Quebec. Go to Quebec at least.
yeah, but go to at least 5 other countries, not just like vacation, but like really go, commit to action, right? And because this is a process, and when you go to those countries, read books about those countries, either before you go or while you're there, right? And because 1 + 1 doesn't equal 2 on this sort of thing, when you read a book about, say, Panama, while you're in Panama, it's not just, I read a book and I'm there, 1 + 1 = 2. It's like 1 + 1 = 3. You're reading about, hey, and you're like, wait a minute, that's right there. I can walk over and look, and it's, and you can learn so much more by reading and going.
Yeah,
And
the context plus the experience together are massive.
yeah, and look what Max is doing. I mean, he's studying, he reads, he's physically going, and he's like a firefighter. I mean, he's going to learn stuff doing those sorts of things that there is no way you're going to learn by reading. You just got to do it.
Exactly, 100%.
Michael,
So-
I got to ask you, you're an inveterate book buyer, especially of old books, of course. Where are you going to store all those things? Because you can't leave them in Panama.
Well, I'm thinking about opening an office here because Panama is, when I say I'm thinking pretty hard by the time you hear me say something like that out loud, because this is going to be so key. And you need to, once you develop I've spent more than a year here since Biden was installed. And because I realized just how important it is. But, my Japanese library is over in Japan. So, a lot of it will be in Japan.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That
makes
makes
sense. And Panama is centrally located. You can get to a lot of places from there.
Yeah, this place is going to be a center of action forever.
course.
I mean, while we're doing international trade anyway.
Of course, the bright side of Uruguay is it's not a center of action.
Nope. It
Yeah.
is like being on an island.
Now, as you can imagine, the thoughts go through my mind daily about being in Uruguay, or I think I'm thinking not Argentina, but more Uruguay. Although I haven't been to Uruguay, so I'm taking y'all's word for it.
Yeah, you're not going to find all those wonderful bookstores here that you find in Buenos Aires, that's for sure. But if you want, we were just talking to an Argentine who spent years and years in Uruguay and also a couple other places. He's in Miami right now, just before this call. And you know, he remarked that like every time he lands in Uruguay, it's just relaxed. It's like as soon as you get here, you're like, ah, it's fine. You know, it just has
Don't
that
worry, be
vibe.
happy.
Yeah, it's fine. It's fine. You know, nothing, no big deal. No rush. You know, no one's gonna rush. It's just gonna go as it goes.
Yeah, from there you can just watch what happens in Panama. You should see this book I got from 1915, by the way. You know, when the canal opened in 1914, they did a big exposition in San Francisco in 1915. They were trying to figure out if they should have it in New Orleans or San Francisco. So basically, you got this new canal open, and now we're going to show everybody how to use it. And all the bankers are there at the exposition, of course. So, and so they've got like a CIA fact book that came out and sort of like that. CIA wasn't formed yet, of course, 1950s for that. But so this book from 1915 is like a CIA fact book, though. So it talks about Uruguay as an example. So all the cattle and water and all this and the government form and all this. And basically it's showing you like how people in Uruguay could do business with people in Japan. Of course, you'd have to go through the canal, right? And so it was just fascinating how this comprehensive
Is
thing
it
unfolded.
the World Fact Book?
No, it is the 1915 exposition. What's the name of it? I got the book right over here. I can get up and get it if you want.
Oh, it's okay.
But but it's fascinating book. I mean, you could see when they opened the canal, this was such a comprehensive plan. For instance, we formed Panama so that we could make the canal. But you should see some of these old studies, like, and I've got one right here from 1874, I think, or 76. It's Seward was the naval officer's name. You know, there was many reconnaissance. There were reconnaissance down in Colombia to make a canal potentially, multiple here in Panama, and then up in Nicaragua. And I've got the Nicaraguan studies as well, but they're highly detailed, right? Super detailed maps, you know, checking the specific gravity of coal and how much energy it gives off and how much smoke it gives off and all these different things, you know, because they're really in great detail trying to figure out where's the smart place to make the canal. So those reconnaissance happened like in the 1850s, 60s, 70s, 80s, right? So before we even started on the canal, there was a deep body of work that had been done by serious people, like doing all their star charts, where exactly here, and doing their mathematics and their trigonometry, where the stars are and stuff. I mean, it's amazing stuff. We were doing the same in Japan at the same time, and I've got those studies from Commodore Matthew Perry. His report to Congress was 1856, and I picked those up in Tokyo. They're unbelievable. Just like this much books and highly precise maps and color drawings of birds and snakes and snails and fish and like art, like museum level stuff, right? And this was really an actual just reconnaissance in 1853 and 1854 to open Japan. So what you saw happening here in Panama was actually part of something larger. They were also doing it in Japan, and you know, President Grant, after he was president, was touring around the world in 1879 or so. He shows up in Japan. In 1879, President Grant was in Japan. He only liked two countries in Asia, I think. He liked Siam and he liked Japan. He didn't like China. He didn't like India. He didn't like any of them. He liked Siam and Japan. So in his letters in 1879, he's actually warning the Emperor of Japan. They're communicating back and forth in English. President Grant, former President Grant, is warning the Emperor of Japan, don't take foreign debt, because outsiders will come and try to get China and Japan to hate each other and fight each other, and then they'll loan money to Japan, and they'll loan money to China, and then they'll own both of you. And the Emperor of Japan's thanking him for that advice.
That's interesting. Did you ever read a book called Chasing the Last Laugh? It was
No.
about Mark Twain's life during the late 1890s. He's going around doing a world tour, essentially trying to get himself out of bankruptcy. But it's basically just covers, he goes all around the world and does these various, he does, you know, basically these stage shows where he's just kind of ad-libbing. Anyway, it's about that, you know, this roughly the same era we've been talking about this whole time. That whole time to be alive, probably post-Civil War up until World War I, was like this remarkable time in the world where all kinds of crazy things were happening. And I don't know, I'm a big fan.
That's interesting
you
because
could-
Mark Twain, when Grant was back in the U.S., Mark Twain wrote his autobiography with President Grant. So
Yeah,
he
to
had,
help save him, to save him financially. Yeah.
yeah, but and then Mark Twain ends up bankrupt. So Mark Twain's helping Grant not be bankrupt. That's an incredible book. I mean, the book, Grant's biography written with Mark Twain, I would highly suggest that book to people. Yeah, it's a fascinating, because Grant came right through here. Some of his people died right near me here. Actually, some of his people are in the National Cemetery. We got a National Cemetery here.
Yeah,
In
they were
Panama.
taking the train over.
No, they weren't taking the train.
Really?
They came before the train.
Oh.
The train wasn't open yet. So when Grant showed up, he had already contracted for some mules because remember he was being deployed. I think was he a captain at the time? He may have been a captain. He must have been a stud if they sent him on this mission. Well, he was a stud, but they sent him over because the gold rush was going on in California, and apparently it was kind of lawless. So he was, Grant was supposed to come over with some military guys, and when they showed up to the Cologne side on the Atlantic side, and the mules that they had contracted for the gold rush people, they had money, so they had taken all the mules. So Grant had to walk across, and all the children that they had children with them, all of them died, and I think he lost like 200 people or something like that on that journey across the isthmus, and some of them were not far from where I'm at now. Yeah.
Wild. Wild. Well, I love the history lesson with you, Michael. It's always fun, and it's really fun to have you back on the show. We'll have to do it more frequently again. So thank you, for taking the time to join us. I know you got other stuff to do today, but we'll go ahead and wrap it up here. So again, thanks so much for doing it. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you all for having me on.
Thanks.